Morning, how are we doing? Ready? I've discovered that drinking isn't only encouraged in Poland, it seems to be mandatory. so that's been happening. So this talk is it's a talk in 3 parts. And it started with someone asking me it was actually about the craftsmanship, software craftsmanship movement. And I've got some quite strong opinions about software craftsmanship movement. I guarantee I'll be banging my head on those things at some point. I'm going to come over and see you guys. Hello. But what occurred to me is there's something about really caring about something. You know, really caring about your vocation, the career you've chosen, the path you've chosen. And that seems to me anyway, to separate people who do software as a day job and just turn up and type stuff and go home, versus people who really, really want to understand their craft, understand what it is they do. So I wanted to share a bit about what I think the journey to mastery looks like. So this is a talk in 3 parts. To start with, I want to look at what mastery means, some definitions of mastery, some types of mastery, some mastery in some different contexts. Then I want to look at how that applies to us as software people. How many programmers here? That's awesome. I'm looking at a sea of hands. How many non-programmers? Put your hands up. Are you a cause of programming in other people? Right. Excellent. Right, so basically we've got essentially almost entirely programmers and a handful of delivery managers. Brilliant. So they're over there. Get them. And yeah, so I better start, hey. Sorry, part 3 is me rambling on about folding paper. I've had a lifelong obsession with origami, with folding paper, and there's been quite a long narrative arc of one particular part of that story, and as I was thinking about this talk, it suddenly occurred to me that it was a really nice metaphor for mastery, so I'm going to try and squeeze that in at the end in my customary way of usually running out of time. But before we do any of that, I want to look at mastery. What does mastery mean? There are many definitions of mastery. This is mine, okay? So I think of mastery as capability in a context. There's 2 really important words there. Capability and context. Capability means knowing how to do something, okay? You can't operate, you can't execute, you can't do something in a context unless you know how. And knowing how, for a lot of skills, may take many years to master, okay? And then in a context it doesn't matter how good you are at something if you don't know when to apply it, okay? So recognizing that context, recognizing where that makes sense is another key part to mastery. A few years ago, actually not a few years ago, probably about 20, 30 years ago now, blimey, some time ago, there's a guy who was a tennis coach, and he became a very, very successful tennis coach. And he had an unusual technique for coaching tennis, and he called it the inner game. And he ended up writing a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and then he discovered that writing self-help books is much more lucrative than coaching tennis, and so then he wrote The Inner Game of Cricket, The Inner Game of Golf, The Inner Game of Dog Walking, and he made a bunch of money. But the inner game of tennis, the whole thing centers around a single equation. He says P equals P minus I. So what he's saying there is, he says, so the big P, that is your performance. Your performance in any given situation, in a particular tennis match, or in return for returning a particular serve. Your performance in that moment is made up of 2 things. It's made up of your potential, the little p, how good you could be, minus the interference, I. And what he found when he looked around various different styles of coaching is that almost all coaching is critical. Almost all coaching is something like, watch out for your topspin, watch out for your footing. And the bizarre thing with something like sport, which is mostly muscle memory and spatial memory, is that as soon as you make someone consciously aware of any aspect of it, they become rubbish at it, because their conscious mind isn't the thing that usually controls it. So when you say to someone, so for instance, if right now none of you are aware of the sensation of the seat under your bottom, now you all are. See what happened there? right? So we're getting sensations all the time, we're getting input all the time, and our unconscious filters stuff and manages stuff. So when you say to someone, okay, who as a child played hide and seek? And who as a child, that's most of you, who as a child, when you were playing hide and seek, tried to breathe quietly? And it sounded like, because we're rubbish at breathing when we think about it. Yeah, it needs to be unconscious. So what he realized is he said, okay, so your potential is how good you can be. Well, that's technique. I can teach you that. The interference thing, that's where the money is, right? If I can teach you to block out all of the noise, the everything else, and just focus, then you will be much closer to your potential. And using this technique, he created some world-class tennis players, which is kind of cool. So let's look at some different contexts then. I want to look at different types of mastery, or different flavors of mastery, if you like, because it's quite a rich word. It can mean many things, again, in different contexts. Let's start with something that I think is quite a straightforward thing to understand the mastery of. Has anyone actually been to a classical music conference and seen a concert pianist play live? A handful of you. Okay, great. Was it mind-blowing? Right? Oh, my word. The skill involved in playing a Chopin piano concerto or something. So what a concert pianist does is this. They learn a bunch of stuff. They learn music theory, like how does music work, how do chords work, all that kind of stuff. Then they learn piano theory. So the piano is actually a string instrument. The strings happen to be connected to little keys, what the pedals do, how that works, how to create sound, how to sustain chords. The mechanics of piano playing, so how to move their fingers around on the keys and where chords are and all that kind of stuff. And then they start to learn individual pieces, and they typically learn individual pieces chunk at a time. Okay, so that's the learning aspect. Then there's a practice aspect to that. So the practice is they practice things like pitch. They practice things like chords and scales and progressions, and again, it's repetitive. It's again and again and again. Now, the thing with being a concert pianist is this. When you perform, when you're practicing and when you perform, essentially everything is in your control. There are no unknowns outside of your control unless, the piano falls through the floor, which is pretty unfortunate. Mostly the piano doesn't fall through the floor. Yeah? Or even more ironic, another piano falls on you, because that would really suck. Notwithstanding those things, most of piano playing is within your remit as a pianist. So you practice and you practice and you practice, and providing you practice and providing you remember and providing nothing goes wrong on the day, then that little p, your potential, so there's no interference, you're going to perform at your best. So mastery in this context is we want to create a consistently flawless performance. And again, both those words matter. Flawless, it's repeated exactly as it should be. And the thing with that is I was about to say there's no creativity in it. That's completely wrong. There's an awful lot of feel and personal stuff goes into it. But there's you're within very constrained parameters, right? Someone else wrote down that sequence of notes that is Rachmaninoff's third piano sonata, concerto, right? That is a particular sequence of notes. It's a particularly complicated sequence of notes, but there isn't another sequence that you could play, and that would be Rach 3. That doesn't exist. So it's got to be consistent, it's got to be flawless, and that is the thing you're trying to achieve again and again and again. Okay. So let's think about that as a programmer. That might be, I might be learning a new programming language. Again, the language is defined, its libraries are defined, its APIs are defined. So now it's on me. So now I can practice and I can practice and I can start to understand that language and learn those libraries. Or learning an API. Okay, so now let's look at somewhere else, an ice hockey player. Well, what's different with an ice hockey player? Well, now I'm in a team. Now there's suddenly a whole bunch of stuff that's not in my control. So what can I do? Well, I'm in awe of ice hockey players, okay? Mostly because I can't ice skate particularly well. So when I go ice skating, it might be once a year on a little ice skating rink in London or something, and I'm a little bit like that. Yeah. And these guys learn to skate, and they learn to skate so well they forget about skating and they learn hockey. I'm like, that is nuts, okay? So now these guys are whacking this little puck around super fast at each other on ice while skating, holding a stick, right? This is impossible, okay? So So you have to learn it in that order. You can't learn ice hockey and then learn to skate, because that's going to really hurt, okay? So the first thing you do is you learn how to skate. Then you learn the basic rules of hockey. And then you're going to learn some tactics and some techniques for, I don't know, defensive, offensive play. And then you start learning combinations. So now you're really very much aware that it's outside of you. So particularly that last one, combinations and gameplays are about how you interact with other people. Now there's a whole bunch of levers, controls that are out of your control. So what do we practice? Well, I practice individual techniques. I might practice stopping, turning, passing, that kind of stuff. Team techniques and strategies. So blocking moves. And then I might practice offensive and defensive techniques. So what happens when they do blah? Because now there's another part of this complex adaptive system, which is you've got another bunch of guys who not only do you not control, but they're out to get you. Okay? So now, what does mastery look like there? I can't just do the same thing again and again and again, because that's not how the game works, because people are going to do different stuff. So now mastery is a different thing. Again, there's a consistency to it. And I'm playing at my best. Now, at my best doesn't mean that I have all the possession of the puck. Right? At my best might mean that I know when to pass. I know when to dummy. I know when to get out of the way. But I know that because I practice and practice and practice, and I do that consistently. So, soldier, that just got real. Kind of another game. Much, much more serious consequences, okay? So again, you've got the good guys and the bad guys, right? Depending on whose side you're on. And again, you're going to practice, and again, it's a team sport, and again, there's a whole bunch of that stuff going on. So now what do we learn? We learn some really interesting things as a soldier. So the US military gets a lot of criticism, I think, for being very command and control and 19th century and all that kind of stuff. There are parts of the US military that are surprisingly not that. So when you have some sort of military offensive and you've got a bunch of soldiers going in, typically what will happen is this. They're given what's called an objective. We need you to take that hill. Right? That hill's got some bad guys on it. We need you to isolate that hill. And they don't just say isolate that hill. They say we need you to isolate that hill so we can get these supplies to that hospital. Okay, so that's two bits of information. One is what's the objective, and the other is what's the reason. And after that, it's on you. What are you going to need? Who are you going to need? How are we going to get you out? Okay, all of that stuff is on you. Yeah. So you, as a soldier, you learn discipline. That's the first thing you learn, because under pressure, stuff's going to happen, and you need to be able to respond to that stuff instinctively. You don't have time to be thinking about that and all the other things. You learn survival techniques, of course. You learn decision-making under pressure, which is interesting. They do things like, you go in a little tank where they gradually take out all the air. I mean, not all the air, because you die. But enough of the air that now you're kind of losing air and you're making bad decisions. And there's a really interesting phenomenon, which is when you're making bad decisions, one of the decisions you're making is whether you're making bad decisions. So when you're making bad decisions, you think you're making good decisions because that's another bad decision, which is why we can all dance when we're drunk, right? And we're all much better looking. No, we're not. We're not. We just think we are because we're making bad decisions. And then personal, physical, and mental boundaries, because again, that's really important. So what they practice two really interestingly opposing things. So the first thing they practice is repetition of basic skills, the stripping down and building a gun thing, but all of that kind of stuff. Because, again, if you're in a smoke-filled room or there's loads of noise and distraction and you're disorientated, being able to do that stuff mechanically without thinking is, can literally be a life or death decision. But then what they also learn is how to deal with unfamiliar scenarios. So you've got the incredibly familiar and the incredibly unfamiliar. And both of those things are part of that basic training. Otherwise, neither of those is going to work. Neither one is sufficient without the other. You can have all the unfamiliar scenario training in the world. If you don't have the basic discipline to cope in that scenario, again, it's capability in a context. So, what does mastery look like for those guys? So mastery there, I can't predict things. So I need to adapt instinctively. So that, again, means that both of those things have to be true. I have to be able to adapt, because if my instincts are saying, do this thing, and I can't do this thing, that's no use. And it needs to be instinctively, because it's happening too fast for me to do mechanically. Okay, so what? So how do all these things apply to us as software people, these different styles of mastery? What's our journey? What's our journey as programmers, as young programmers, as middle-y programmers, as more experienced programmers? So there's a lovely metaphor, if you like, from the Middle Ages around how people used to become craftsmen. And it's mostly around stonemasonry, because what would happen is you would, in your village, you might develop a skill, show a flair for being stonemason, and that might mean that you get to, help out with some people building little stone houses, and if you're good enough, you've got to help build the local church, and then kind of that's it, because that's all the stone building, right? And then so somewhere in a city nearby, a couple of days on a horse away, there might be someone's building a cathedral. That'd be a pretty cool gig, right? So you think, okay, I'm going to try and get onto that gig. And so what happened is people used to move around. And this is where the idea of the Freemasons came around along with funny handshakes and stuff. Because what we had was these apprentice stonemasons would work alongside a master mason, and then eventually they'd become like good enough, and the master mason said, you should go and work with some other people now. And they'd teach them some magic signs. Yeah? So that when they turned up at the next village, there'd be another master mason, and they'd say, are you any good? Well, I know this magic sign. So like the Freemason, all these sort of secret signs were like a Middle Ages LinkedIn. Okay? It's like, or GitHub, yeah? So I can't show you my stonemasonry because it's in the other town and I can't bring it with me, but I can show you here we go, here's a funny little handshake. So, so you had these, and they were called journeymen because they would travel from town to town getting work as masons. And eventually as a journeyman, you would get skilled enough that you thought, you know what? I reckon I could run my own one of these. And then, again, as you're working with different master masons, you learn more and more funny handshakes until they say, do you know what, you're a master mason, you should go build a cathedral. And so I love this idea of like sort of apprentice into journeyman into master. So I was thinking about that again in the context of us and software. So, but before we do that, what's mastery to me? What does mastery mean? So as programmers, okay, we're software engineers, we're programmers, we're software craftsmen. Any self-describing software craftsmen? Excellent. Both of you. Right, it's nice. So what's mastery to me? Is it beautiful code? Is it the whole clean code, solid, beautifully factored, beautifully laid out? Is that the thing I build? For some people it is. For me, for a bunch of time it was. I love looking at nice code. There's something really aesthetically pleasing about nice code. Then I realized that actually I wasn't really in the business of producing beautiful code, although I tended to do that from time to time. What I was really doing was developing wonderful products. And some of the most wonderful products have some of the most shocking code. That's not an excuse to write shocking code, okay? But it's just to say, be careful where you put that focus, right? So is it about developing wonderful products? Well, kinda. But then, I don't know, who has an iPhone here? Who's got an iPhone? Okay. Who's got some kind of Android phone? Yay. Who's got a Nokia phone running Symbian? Do you see what happened there? 30 hands immediately went down again. Yeah. I think the whole Symbian platform is one of the most brilliant bits of engineering and one of the most fantastic product platforms that never got the press it should have. Developing wonderful products doesn't matter if they don't land. Okay? The history of marketing is littered with amazing products that people just never got or that never made it. So there's another aspect to this, which is business impact. Okay? Is mastery of software, of programming, the ability to use technology, to use IT, to genuinely impact a business? That might mean creating an amazing product. That might mean writing some world-class software. What it really means is keeping a focus on that thing. Okay? And these are just 3 of mine, right? I'm sure you can come up with dozens more. The reason I put these 3 up is a kind of bit of a confession, as it were, is that during my career, I've obsessed about all of those. It's taken me, I'm going to go with 20 years. It's taken me about 20 years of my career, about 25 years into my career now. After about 20 years, I realized that what I was trying to do was impact business. It took me that long, because I'm an idiot. So hopefully it will take you less long because I just told you, all right? But don't believe me. Go and find out for yourself. So, okay, let's look at software mastery then. As an apprentice, what does software mastery look like? What's that journey look like? As an apprentice, what can you do? How many people here have been writing software for less than 2 years? Okay, so Dev Day, let me tell you about your demographic. None of them. How many people have been writing software for less than 5 years? A good smattering. Okay, less than 10 years. A lot of you. Less than 50. No, I won't do that. Okay. As well as going, shut up. So as an apprentice then, so a lot of you are, as you move around in industry, as you move around between different careers or different technologies, different domains, you're kind of learning all the time, but you're also kind of starting over all the time. So you might move from, I don't know, finance into healthcare. Okay, so now in the domain of healthcare, you're new and shiny again. You're learning again. What kind of things can we do? Well, one of the things that I do, and have done a lot, is find people who do what you want to do, okay, and model them. That's a technical, that's an NLP, behavioral psychology term. Modeling someone is the kind of fake it till you make it. So I did this when I first started dealing with senior execs. Okay, I didn't know how to speak business language to senior execs, but I hung around people who did. And they used to say things like risk and ROI and investment and portfolio, and I was like, I wonder if that's a... So, blah, blah, risk, blah, blah, portfolio, blah, blah. Well, Dan, you seem to know all this stuff. Wow, oh my God, they are all making it up, right? Or they're not, but what happens is you hang around with someone who talks like that for a while, and it does start to make sense, okay? So model those people, stalk them on Twitter, not in real life. That's illegal. Don't stalk people, okay? Code of conduct, no stalking. No, follow them, follow their work, follow what they do. If they do hand-waving talks at conferences, go and find them online. There's been a wonderful shift in our industry that I've seen in the last 10 years, which is that you used to get conference speakers might have a particular talk, and it was almost like, it wasn't really a talk like, this is my current thing. It was more like a show, and they kind of do the talk again and again and again and again, and they take it all around. And then a handful of conferences started videoing the talks and putting them online. And you could see a few kind of quite well-known presenters just kicked off. They're like, you can't put my talk online, because what they're thinking is, people are going to see my talk and then I can't go and do this talk at another conference. And it all kind of got a bit interesting, because what really happens is this. There's a handful of people that are going to want to go and see that talk, okay, and they'll find it online. And that's great. But it turns out, as long as you keep yourself reasonably current and come up with new stuff, that's not a problem. And it turns out that it allows allows lots of people to see the stuff you talk about. So I would say to all of you guys who are sitting in seats at Dev Day, to think about standing on a stage at Dev Day, because that'd be kind of cool. I mean, not all of you, because it's going to get crowded, but, one at a time. Start speaking, start presenting. But for now, find those people, model them, stalk them, look at their work, study how they do things, and then try acting a bit like them. I have a real beef about this. I might be softening my position on this, but not much. So there's this whole thing about coding katas and coding dojos and coding Japanese hand-wavy mystical stuff, because we like Japanese hand-wavy mystical stuff, and martial arts and things. We're programmers, guys. Most of us can't run 200 meters without breaking into a sweat. So let's get rid of the jitsu metaphor, because it's just silly. But no, so we do this stuff, and there's a kind of repetitive thing. And I think one of the most, discomforting for me projections of this was when someone practiced, I can't remember who it was, someone practiced a Ruby kata so much that they could then do it fluently, like a piano recital, and then recorded themselves doing it and put it online. And I'm like, wow, that's exactly how I program. Right? That's how I write software. I write the same piece of software again and again and again until I can do it without looking. Yeah? No, that's not what we do. Why would you do that? When I learned to swim with armbands on, I had that. I was good at that. I could do swimming with armbands on. And then one day I took the armbands off and jumped in a pool and nearly drowned. True story. Okay? Because I hadn't learned to swim with armbands. I'd learned to swim with armbands. It's a different thing. Right? Don't try and ride a bike with stabilizers, because that's a different thing from riding a bike. Someone's done a genius thing with children's bicycles. I don't know if you've seen this or any of you have kids. A friend of mine's little boy has a wooden bicycle that doesn't have pedals. That's it. It's a wooden bicycle without pedals. So it's a seat, and he sits on it, and it has wheels, and he runs along on it. And then every now and then he puts his feet up for about a fraction of a second. He goes, I did cycling, like that. But then what happens is after a couple of days of that, he goes, I'm not going to, obviously I can't do it, but both feet go up. And then after a while, he's now scooting along on this thing, and the really cool thing that's going on is he's looking at his feet. What he's actually doing is balancing. Yeah? So he's learning how to actually ride a bike. Yeah? And so then when you give him pedals, the rest of it's fine. It's a natural progression. Don't learn to swim with armbands. So, there's enough problems on GitHub that could use your love. Yeah? There's enough open source projects out there that you could get involved in. I'm often critical about some of the core disciplines, if you like, in our industry, and it's not because I don't think those disciplines are valuable. I think those disciplines are enormously valuable, and then there's some more stuff. There's no point having the and then conversation until we've got the basics down pat. All the Uncle Bob stuff, all the solid stuff, theory, type theory, system theory, functional programming, object-oriented programming, concurrency. In my class, my Accelerated Agile class, I often ask the question, how many models of concurrency can you give me? Most classes are good for about 3. This is maybe 30 very, very experienced developers in a room, and they can give me 3 concurrency models. That makes me sad. And that makes me sad because that means they only have 3 models by which they can reason about concurrency. Right? The more of these things you have in your back pocket, the more of these things you have in your head, the more options you have for thinking about a particular situation. Study the basics, study the theory, study the methods, study languages and tools. Okay? As an apprentice, you want to optimize for feedback. You want to be constantly iterating and allowing that iteration. And this is the P equals P minus I thing again. Yeah? So I've got my performance as a technologist is my potential, i.e. the stuff I know, the stuff I've learned, the stuff I can bring to bear, minus the interference, the having to go off and search for stuff that I should really know, the having to context switch and break state and do all that stuff and get distracted. Okay? The less of that, the more I'm in flow. There's this lovely idea of being in flow. When you're in flow, it's amazing. I visited one company this week, and one of their problems we've discovered is that they do a lot of context switching. And my favorite kind of soundbite out of the whole engagement about them talking about kind of being victims to context switching is they said, well, one of our business managers likes to say, well, I want you to focus on these 5 things. I cannot focus on 5 things. That's not focusing, that's blurring, that's glazing, that's the other thing, right? Focus is narrow. Focus is on one thing. You cannot focus on 5 things because what you're doing is focusing on the plate spinning. You're focusing on the fact that you have 5 things in flight. That's the only thing you can focus on, and that leads to thrashing, and that leads to very, very, very slow progress. But I need all these things to be in flight, so I need you to be focusing on all 5 of them. That's not going to work. So as a journeyman then, what are we looking at here? This is where you're traveling from town to town. Luckily, these days, you don't actually have to travel from town to town. Okay? You can do that virtually, right? So you can build a portfolio. I know a bunch of people have started using something like GitHub as their portfolio. I would suggest that might not be a very good thing to do unless you are a prolific open source contributor, and that's primarily what you do. I have all manner of crap on GitHub. I would not want someone to look at the stuff that I dump on GitHub as half-baked ideas and go, that's how Dan writes code. If we hire Dan to write code, we'll get that. Pretty sure you won't. I really hope you don't. I'd like to think it's different. But you can put a website together, you can build a portfolio, and you can try different approaches. Okay? Try different domains. If you've got defense down, try healthcare. If you've got finance down, try education. There's lots and lots and lots of learning to be had out there. Or become a deep, deep specialist. Either of those are an option, yeah, or both. Shift around a bit. Try different domains, try different approaches. This I cannot emphasize enough. Learn how you learn. And there's a number of aspects to this. So, not least of which, when you learn, you are typically learning through one of three what are called modalities. You have a visual modality, auditory, and kinesthetic. So visual is when you think in pictures, and you want to see pictures and diagrams, and someone talks to you in pictures, and you end up building a picture in your head. Kinesthetic is that you like to interact with something. So you're drawing mind maps, or you're typing on something and taking notes and that kind of stuff. Auditory is you want to hear stories, okay? And learning through narrative works for you. Now, it took me years, because I'm very much a visual thinker. When I'm talking, I have a picture in my head, and I just want to use enough words to get the same picture in your head. That's what I'm trying to do. And so I just assume that's how I learn. So I learn with pictures. It turns out, I discover, I'm very much a kinesthetic learner. And so what that means is this: when I'm listening to someone, or like listening to a talk, or watching a thing, I have a notebook and I start scribbling. And I might start scribbling a mind map, I might take notes, I might have a laptop and take stuff. I almost never go back and refer to those things. Okay? What I find is that in doing that, I'm much more present, and I'm much more able to take in information, and I have much better recall of that information later. Wow! That's a really annoying thing to discover 20 years later. But it's a useful thing to discover at some point. Okay? So, and again, if you are an auditory learner, if you learn by narrative, and then someone has this quite kind of, not very tonal voice, and it's all very monotone and flat, and they're trying to get a picture in your head because they're very visual, and they don't aware that you're auditory, and so, yeah. And so, what can you do there? Turn it into an internal dialogue. Do something with it. But figure out how you learn. Some people learn by reading books. Some people learn in big bursts. They want to just go dark. They want to go somewhere where it's quiet, and they just want to study for a bunch of time. Some people work much better as magpies, and they try a little bit of learning, and they let that soak in. They do a little bit of learning. I had a great conversation last night with another one of the speakers, and I was describing a model of testing, funny enough, with him. And his response was, at the end of it, I was like, "What do you think?" And he paused, and he said, "I'm going to cogitate on that. I'm going to go and think about that." And I just thought, wow. So he's aware that that's how he processes. He doesn't process in the moment, he cogitates, he goes away and lets it soak for a bit in his background, and then sometime later, decides how he feels about it. And also, he's confident enough in that as his approach to say to me, "I'm not going to say anything now. I'm going to say something later when I've thought about it." I thought, that's someone who knows how they learn. That's someone who knows how they take in information. Learn how you learn how you practice, what works for you. Try lots of different things. So you might surprise yourself. Try lots and lots of different things and use the ones that work. You don't need to know why, you need to know that. This is one of the best bits of advice I was given. Dan, listen like you don't know the answer, right? Because you might not, because sometimes you don't. In a similar vein, someone once said to me, "If you think you're right, shut up and let the other person speak, because if you're right, you'll still be right in 5 minutes. And if you're not, you just stop looking an idiot." So listen like you don't know the answer, because you might not. And if it ain't broke, fix it anyway. Try it. Having got something working, try it a different way. I put together a class in Python, a workshop rather than actual, public class in code. And this Python workshop is about reading data out of a database and transforming it and emitting a bunch of stuff, because that's mostly what people do with Python. And then I thought, I wonder how fast that is compared to something like Java or Scala. So I wrote it again in Scala. And I'm teaching myself Go at the moment, so I did it again in Go. And I learned a whole bunch of things about Go and about Scala and about Python in doing that. And I also learned by benchmarking the Go code, because Go has a lovely little benchmarking library built into it, some unusual things about regular expressions and how they perform, because it was so easy to tinker. And so suddenly I'm now off on a performance tuning benchmarking thing, right? And it was just great fun to play. If it ain't broke, fix it anyway. You'll be surprised where that's going to take you. One of my favorite programmers, a guy called Joe Walms. I've learned an awful lot from Joe. He's been programming for 20, 25 years himself. And he builds products and stuff now, actual like physical products, little camera flashlights and things. And I said to him a few years ago, I said, you still seem just as excited about programming as when you first started. He said, yep. I said, why? And he said, well, what I realized, he said, is if you try hard enough, you can make a computer do anything. And he said, and if you can make a computer do anything, wow, it's just all in your imagination. And I was like, wow, that was really cool. And then I was working with a group of interns, so students, last year. And there were 6 of them, a team of 6 students. 5 of them computer science and 1 economics. And I said to these guys, so they've just spent 6 weeks as an intern in a big bank on a project together. So I said, well, what was the thing what's your favorite sort of takeaway from this? What's the thing you liked the best? And so the first computer science undergrad, he says, I can't believe they threw us together in a team. And normally you're just planted in a desk, and we worked together as a team. He said, agile, all these agile methods, fantastic. He said, we built a product in 6 weeks, they're using it, I'm really excited. He goes, agile's amazing. I'm like, okay. So I asked the second computer science student, and she said, yeah, I mean, agile's just this fantastic, we've done these very, very kind of structured projects in college, and they're really boring, and this was just loads of fun. And I went through agile, and I got to the economics guy, and I said, so what's the thing that you enjoy most? He goes, programming. I was like, what? He goes, oh my God, programming. He said, if I wish I could switch my major now, but it's too late. But he goes, but programming, right? I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, I can make a computer do anything. And I went, whoa. So there's this kind of, 25-year arc, and it's still the same thing that creates that passion. What if you could make a computer do anything? So mastery then, as a master, some of you guys are going to be fairly senior folks, and you're going to have people come into you looking for that guidance. As a master, what can you do? The best advice I can give you is remember where you started, okay? Remember what it felt like to be a bit lost, yeah? And reach out, be available. The best programmers I know make time. Again, Joe is one of my favorite examples of this. When I see him pairing with people, particularly junior people, he is unbelievable. What he does is he doesn't code, or he doesn't type rather, so they always drive. And that must be quite frustrating if you're Joe, because he can go pretty fast. But he's sitting there and they're moving along, and so he lets the learner make the discoveries, and they go, whoa, I just made a computer do a thing, right? And then he gets excited and he goes, whoa, we did, hey, right? And you see them getting enthused by that. Okay, and he is, as I say, one of the most skilled programmers I know, and he still gets excited about a novice programmer doing a cool thing. So I kind of want to tell you a little story about paper folding, because I feel like it ties a lot of this stuff together. I've been doing origami since I was about 7 years old. I got a book when I was 7 called Origami, by a guy called Robert Harbin, who was much better at origami than he was at naming books. And then sometime later, I got a book called Origami 2, also by Robert Harbin, who apparently hadn't believed that he was going to get a franchise, so it didn't occur to him to call the first one Origami 1. So that was kind of cool. And then sometime later, you'll never guess what the next book was. Origami 3. And then Origami 4, and there weren't any more after that. So what happened was I was an obsessive folder of paper, so I made all these things. I made little swans, and I made cranes and flapping birds, and I made little boxes, and I made turtles, and I made horses, and it was really cool, except for this one fold. This one fold eluded me, and it's a jackstone. And a jackstone is like a 6-pointed star. It's a little toy thing. School kids, you have like a little set of 6 of these things and a ball, and you throw the ball up in the air and you pick up these little stones. And anyway, so it's making a little paper 6-pointed 3D star. And I remember trying it. I remember trying it when I was about 10, and I remember because it was the one I couldn't do. And you remember that. And so anyway, so I tried and I tried and I tried and I failed. And there was this one picture. It got to one image, and I didn't understand what was going on in this picture. And then suddenly it was like you know that cartoon with the equation with a whole bunch of stuff, and then it says a miracle occurs, and then it comes out at the bottom. Yeah, it was like that. So you had all this folding, and then this one image that I couldn't understand, and then a Jackstone appeared, and I was like, oh no. So anyway, I discovered girls at the age of whatever, teenage, and then it was girls or origami. Okay, well that's gone then. So. And then I went to university, and I found my origami books, and I thought, that's pretty cool. I'm going to try that again. Hey, I'm 20, right? I can do anything, right? I'm the king of the world. I'm going to fold me a Jackstone. No. No, it didn't happen. And so then I put the book away again and got fed up. So there we go. This is you can see this is Origami 2. You can just see the top of Origami 2. This fold was in Origami 2. I did everything in Origami 3 and everything in Origami 4 out of spite. Right, just to prove to myself that there was this one fold I kept coming back to. And then I was probably about 25 or something, and moving house, and then I found this dusty old book. I was like, oh, I remember that. What was that thing I made a little turtle, wasn't it, in Origami 3, and I loved that little fold, so I made a turtle, and that's really cool. And then I saw Origami 2, and I was like, Jackstone. Damn you, Jackstone. So this is me folding a Jackstone. So you start with a square of paper, because all origami starts with a square of paper, and you crease it like so, along its diagonals and along its crossways. And you kind of fold it into this little thing like this, and then you fold it, and you'll see there's an interesting thing here. This guy here is called a petal fold. This guy here is a petal fold. It's quite a tiny bit of detail. There's 4 of those. There's one of those in each edge. Okay? And then you keep folding it, and you keep folding it, and you keep squishing it down. So anyway, I'm 25, and this is the bit I would always get to. This is the bit I would always get to, and then you unfold it. I forgot to mention, all that stuff up to there, that's called prefolding. We haven't even started yet. Right? It takes about 20 minutes to get to there. Right? Then you unfold it. Now the fun starts. Because what you want to do is you want to hold that corner, right, with 2 hands, that corner, and then you want to hold that corner with your other 2 hands, right? And you can see how this gets tricky, yeah? So, then you start to, and so anyway, 25-year-old me looks at this thing and suddenly went, bing. It's like, wait. I think what they're doing is kind of that. So they're pinching in the 4 sides from the 4 angles, and it suddenly came together. Now, the book hadn't changed, right? The squareness of the paper hadn't changed. The picture in the book hadn't changed. I'd changed, and I don't know, I could not tell you what life events between the age of 20 and 25 caused me to see that book differently, right? But I do know that day I went, wow, and I ended up folding a Jackstone. And it was, I know it's just folding paper, right? But it was kind of wow, that was really cool. So what did I immediately do after that? Folded another Jackstone. And another Jackstone. And I had a bloody room full of Jackstones. I must have folded 30. This is not a fluke. I can do this again. And I ended up with hundreds, big ones, little ones, different sized pieces of paper, foil ones. I can do Jackstones. So then you get this thing, and that basically is where you're trying to get to. So after all this molding of this guy, that's where you're trying to get to. That. I know. But the cool thing is then you grab the corners and you pull it out and you shape it, and then it looks like that. Whoa. 25 years. That's all I'm saying. Right? 25 years. That's it from another angle. There you go. It's a bit of origami porn for you. There you go. Look, just keep looking at that. Look at that. That's fantastic. So, and I was thinking about this in the context of, mastery. And this wonderfully demonstrates all of those forms of mastery, possibly except the army one. But so there's mastery in someone created that fold. It occurred to someone that you could fold a piece of paper in that way and do the four-handed moldy thing and end up with this beautiful six-pointed geometric shape. Wow, someone figured that out. That's an incredibly creative thing to do. There's mastery in the dexterity. Believe me, if any of you do origami, this is really tricky, even if you're quite good. There's mastery there. There's the manual, physical practice mastery. But then it occurred to me that there was something a bit more profound there. And that was this. That piece of paper has been pre-creased so that I can now fold it into a jackstone. Okay? A plain piece of paper can't be folded into a jackstone. It needs to be creased like that before it's even ready to start. And I was thinking about that in terms of the context of us. All the stuff we're learning now is effectively pre-creasing. Yeah? We are being shaped into such a way that we can do some really cool stuff that we can't do yet. I don't know what the stuff's going to be, neither do you, right? But that's the journey. Yeah? That's where we're trying to get to, is we're looking for those opportunities to become pre-creased in such a way that we can form into some pretty interesting things. So what am I saying then? I guess the first thing I'm saying is this: decide on your goal, right? Choose where you want to get to. You can change your mind, that's okay, but have a direction, have an opinion, right? Choose where you want to go. And again, you've got that narrative arc now. Who else is already there who I can model? Well, there's someone who's there who probably is so far advanced that there's no point me modeling that yet because I don't understand why they do that thing. I'll try and find someone at an intermediate level that I can model to start with. It's going to get me out the gate. Understand your process. Right? Understand how you pre-crease, how you shape, how you learn, how you practice. Learn to do those things. Learn to learn, learn to practice. I'm a learning nerd, right? I love learning stuff, and also I love the theory of learning. So I could just talk about that for hours. But the journey never ends. Right? The journey never ends. Stay curious. Stay interested in stuff. Okay? Find things that you are excited about doing. But also, and I think this doesn't get said enough, get excited about whatever it is you are doing. Okay? Whatever it is you're doing, you can choose to get excited about it or not. Yeah, that's a choice. And if you choose to get excited about it, changes your whole approach to it. Yeah? So that's all I had. So thank you.